gracias. It's a great pleasure to be here. Please forgive me for speaking in English. I wish that I could speak Spanish well enough to deliver this address in Spanish, but thank you for the courtesy of listening to me in my native language. I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to the Technological Institute for hosting this event. I appreciate the introduction by Gabriel Servan. I want to acknowledge as a group the distinguished guests who were here: Secretary of State Fernando Guzman Ferrer-Pelaez, Secretary Alonso Loa Vélez, to the General Director of the Institute, Victor Gutierrez Aladro, and to the Rector of the Western Zone, Alfonso Pombo Padilla, and especially to the students, Gustavo Javier Bonilla. Lara, thank you for organizing this. Gustavo and Guadalupe and a great number of the student leaders have really been responsible for organizing this event, and I am extremely impressed with their initiative and with the way in which they have made this possible. I really enjoyed talking with them privately yesterday as a group, and I have learned a great deal about the wonderful project that this is a part of. Allow me also to acknowledge Daniel Keller, who is the Consul General of my country here in Guadalajara. This is not my first visit to Guadalajara, by the way. I first came here when I was 15 years old. I lived for part of the summer in Mexico City with a Mexican family that was friendly with my parents, and by the time the summer was over, I was not only speaking Spanish almost fluently, I was dreaming in Spanish. I learned some words that I wouldn't use here anyway, but that's what 15-year-olds learn, some of what they learn. And another part of what I learned was about Guadalajara, and I was so impressed by my visit here and seeing the historic murals of Rivera and Orozco, and feeling the culture, and it was truly a memorable experience. And coming back here since, I have been incredibly impressed with the way Guadalajara and Jalisco State has developed a positive economic future. This is the Silicon Valley of Mexico now, and has many other dynamic industries of the future. And of course there are problems, as there are everywhere, and we saw with the economic crisis how many regions in my country and yours and elsewhere were really devastated, but Jalisco held up extremely well. I asked one of my friends here what he felt about the economic outlook, and he said, "I feel fine." And that phrase, "I feel fine," recalled for me a story that I first heard more than 30 years ago when I was a young congressman in my home state of Tennessee. And I had the practice of holding town hall meetings all across my congressional district. And one Saturday evening, when I was driving home after having 6 of these meetings and I was a little tired, I was listening to music on the radio, and I was listening to something called the Grand Ole Opry. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, where the Grand Ole Opry is located. Many of you have never heard of it, but it is the center of what we call country western music. And last evening we had a wonderful dinner in a valley called Glorico, did a fantastic presentation, and one of the presentations was in the style of the state of Chihuahua, and it reminded me of country western music with what we call cowboy hats. And anyway, that's the Grand Ole Opry, and I was listening to it. And in those days, they, in addition to music, they had a famous comedian named Cousin Minnie Pearl. and most of you will never have heard of her, but she was famous in my home, and she was from way out in a rural area, and she wore a straw hat with the price tag still attached to the hat. And she told a story that evening on the radio about a farmer who was involved in an accident. And he went to court and hired a lawyer and sued the other driver for damages. And the other driver hired a lawyer who cross-examined the farmer, put him on the witness stand, and asked him, isn't it true that immediately after this accident, you said, I feel fine? And the farmer said, well, it's not that simple. You see, I was taking my cow to town in the back of my truck, and this man came driving across the center of the road, and the lawyer said, wait a minute, we don't want to hear a long story. We're in the middle of a trial. Just answer the question yes or no. Did you or did you not say, after the accident, I feel fine? And the farmer said, well, I was leading up to that. You see, I was taking my cow to town in the back of my truck. And this man came driving across the center of the road and ran right into my truck and knocked it over and threw me out and threw the cow out. I was on one side and the cow was on the other. And the policeman came up and took one look at that cow and said, she is suffering. Pulled out his gun and shot her right between the eyes. Came around to my side of the truck and said, how do you feel? So I said, I feel fine.